Hello, everyone, and welcome to Frank Words. Our focus in this podcast is on being whole persons. We've been exploring different aspects of our stories, the narratives we tell ourselves about ourselves, and how we present ourselves to the other through the stories that we do tell. And we'll probably continue that theme from time to time, but today we're beginning a new tack. We're exploring some common themes related to wholeness that all of us encounter in one way or another. And today's theme is shame and guilt. And there's no one who could listen to this and not on some level relate to both shame and guilt because we all have or have had plenty of both. With me today is a great friend of many years, the Very Reverend James Kowalski. Jim was for 15 years in recent times the Dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. He and his wife, Dr. Ann Brewer, now live in Vermont, and today he has not left Vermont, but has joined me in this studio. And so welcome, Jim. Tell us a little bit about you and where you are today.
Thanks, Frank. It's amazing what we can do virtually. Even if we can't physically be together, at least we can connect and then hopefully reach out to other people. Uh, my interest in shame was preceded by an awareness of feeling guilty and really not even knowing there might be a difference. I remember being told growing up a lot about you should be ashamed of yourself for this, or I'd be ashamed if I found out you did that, or something like that. But I don't know that being told about being ashamed helped me understand anything about shame. I just would feel guilty. And I didn't realize that both eventually would help me understand a lot more about some of my deepest fears were that I don't belong, I'm not good enough, I could be abandoned or cast out because of something I do or don't do. Um, and so feeling guilty a lot of the time, and eventually coming to terms with what is shame, and also what did it mean to grow up around what I came to understand were shame basing experiences, even shame based people.
Mm-hmm.
These are concepts that I didn't really start exploring until probably my late 20s, early 30s,
When you started
and they really
exploring them,
helped
what
me.
began your exploration when you decided in your 20s to 30s to start looking into it? Anything particular?
Uh, Mostly just having this feeling of dread that there was a line that could be crossed that would mean the end of relationships. That you could be, I mean, everybody knew you could get expelled from school or something like that. That was not part of my experience. I always tried to be a good student and a good kid in school, but uncovering the fact that I was terrified within my own family of origin and with certain friendships, that there were certain ways that I could be cast out. And reading a lot of stories as I got introduced to different kinds of literature, some of it was early adolescent literature. Some of it would be the classics, where there's so many stories about people getting asked out or thrown away or
Oh
being
yeah.
rejected or making journeys on their own, trying either to be reconciled or to try to find a new or real home or to go back home, to be restored, to be reconciled. So I related to a lot of that stuff, but I didn't connect all the dots until I really began to explore what what causes me to feel this way.
As you are talking, I'm thinking, yep, you're right, because the Madeline L'Engle said one time there are only a few stories, and we keep recycling them, and all those
That's true.
stories about abandonment and so forth. I'm thinking about the number of Shakespearean plays in which someone is abandoned or someone is exiled, um, and I'm thinking about the number of biblical stories and the number of operas where that all comes to. It's amazing the number
It's a
of
huge part
stories.
of human history.
It really
And
is.
I
It's
mean,
something that's
the
universal.
Bible as we know it, the Bible as we know it, is entirely inherited from the perspective of exile. The literature we have isn't the earliest that might have been created by those faith communities. What we have, however, comes post exile, post exilic period. So it's always through the lens of I can't go home, or I lost my home, or there may come a time when we'll be reunited, when we'll get back to Jerusalem. I mean, going back to the Old Testament. And then I got to go to Egypt a couple of times and travel with some uh, Egyptologists who knew hieroglyphics. It turned out all the stories are the same there too. I mean,
Oh
I would be
yeah,
looking at these old tablets and I couldn't make heads or hair, whatever the expression is, and I had no idea what. But the guy would be interpreting the story, and it was not only the same as what you find in the Bible or something like that. It was my story.
yeah,
It was exactly
exactly.
how I'd been feeling, or as some of the psychologists would say, it was the same script that was being
Exactly.
replayed again and again.
When I don't know that I've shared this with you, but I've been taking German lately. In fact, for over a year now. And so I now have a tutor in addition to some other stuff that I've been doing. And she said, "Why don't we listen to a song?" Because I won't give you a lot of the reasons for that, but she essentially said listening to German music was one of the ways I became fluent in German. And I said, "Fine, if that worked for you, maybe it'll work for me." And so we listened to a song that was by this well known German artist who I didn't know. His name is Bela B. And Bela B sang a song which you can find on the internet called Zoo House, and I listened to it with my eyes closed, so I was not seeing the YouTube video. I was just simply listening to the words to see what I could pick up. Well, as it turns out, I was picking up some words that I did know, but I didn't pick up the theme of it. You know what the theme was? Immigration and how people had been abandoned. And when I kept hearing zoo house, I kept hearing your house or to home or something. And the whole song was about abandonment and how people
Yeah.
had left and so forth. The world is full of people today who have that experience of being exiled, who have that experience of being abandoned. And that may not have to do immediately with shame and guilt. But what you're saying, and I'm hearing, is that shame, and we haven't talked about guilt much yet, but shame certainly is one way that we fear and sometimes deal, I guess, with exile, the condition of being abandoned or separated or cast out.
Well, if we're aware of shame we're feeling, I think we can have insights into all kinds of things you're alluding to. The problem is the feeling of shame can cover up a lot of other feelings, and we can project it onto other people. So in my opinion, a lot of what's going on in the world today, where we're going through huge, huge courses of migration, and that's created a lot of refugees, a lot of immigration. And then, even in a place, speaking of Germany, where Angela Merkel was so responsive, and Germany seemed for a while to be so welcoming to so many immigrants. And I was there just as that was happening. And a younger guy, tour guide, was saying to me, well, we love having all these people come to Berlin because Berlin right now has only 3 or 4 million people in it, and it was a city built for 9 million. Our sanitation system doesn't even work properly without more people. Bring them on. Well, within a couple of years, I don't know what his feeling was, but many Germans had turned against that whole immigration wave. Merkel is vilified. She was considered heroic because of the leadership. Why did that happen? Why did people turn against the people who were homeless, who wanted to make this new country their home, who were looking for a home, who were migrating or immigrating, or who had been refugees and wanted a home? And I think a lot of it was they became angry, they became afraid, They felt it's a zero sum game. If you come into this place and it becomes your home, it takes something away from this place as my home. There's not enough space, or there's not enough money, or there's not enough food, whatever. There's not enough jobs. We create all, and some of that is legitimate in the sense that I don't know how to solve all those problems, but could we sit down and have a conversation about those? How would you employ everyone? What's a reasonable amount of unemployment? How do you get, you're getting some really excellent people in, but how would you educate people? If somebody wants to make this their home, wouldn't you have a self-interest in giving them an education so that they could come here and be a productive citizen? I mean, it turns out that a lot of these immigrants that we now say we don't want anymore were paying taxes. They were working. I mean, so tell me what was wrong with that, you know? And but we create all these stories as if to say, if they come in here and take a place, they have to be taking my place. Well, what that says to me is my shaming them is covering up my fear that there's not enough room here, or there's not enough of something that I'm going to need here, and I'm going to lose my place.
Okay, let's bring that down to a very personal level and move it to a kind of a different key maybe of this discussion. Um, so you and I both could talk, and you've already said some things about your own sense of shame. Um, I don't need to share, anything particularly personal, but it's not because I'm ashamed of it, of course. I
Right.
can I can tell you that, and you tell you and all of our listeners that my first experiences of shame were surprising in the sense that when I was a little boy, I've often said if you'd given me the option when I was a kid as to whether I wanted to be trans and become a girl, I would have voted for it in a heartbeat. I'm glad I didn't because I won't go into why, but anyway, I'm very happy to be who I am right now. But the point of it is that part of me has never left. It has never departed. When I hit first grade, in particular, uh, up until which time my older brother was probably the only person in my circle of near relatives and so on who really ranked on me for being a little sissy boy. But when I got to first grade, boy, did I have an eye-opening thing. Um, I could give you chapter and verse, but we don't have time to, document all of this stuff. But suffice it to say that I felt absolutely humiliated, um, starting with my name, which was Francis. And it happened to be one of these by gender names. Girls were named Francis, boys were named Francis. So that didn't help matters when people were wondering what I was. And secondly, Francis the Talking Mule
Oh
was a
yeah, right.
cartoon character. Are you too young to remember Francis? Aren't
No,
you?
I remember that there were even movies about it.
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, Joe and I were in a museum in Pittsburgh not long ago, the Andy Warhol Museum, in fact, and there was a poster of Francis the Talking Mule, and I said, "Son of a gun, Francis the Talking Mule." I used to go and enjoy his movies, but by God, I didn't like to be called Francis the Talking Mule.
No, of course
And
not. Of
because I
course not.
talked a lot, because I've always been verbal, that's exactly what I did. All right, all of that amounted to a huge pile of shame. I became ashamed of who I was, later on what my body was, and I especially did not like competing with people who I felt were superior. And I'm not talking about intellectually. I've always been a person of words, and I've always been a good student and academically inclined and so on. So that was never, in fact, that was one of my saving devices. I was excellent at some things that not everybody else was excelling in.
But not in
Um,
first grade. In
but
first grade, there are a
well,
lot of
at
other
first
things.
at first grade, you don't have any standards by which to compare.
Right, right.
And
Well,
and so
except that group that's shaming you.
exactly. And
No.
I anyway, it's
Well,
I've
I mean, this is a different story, but I think it's the same dynamic to the point of being a good student. I would come home with grades, and my father had we put the report cards to the left of my father's plate in their envelopes. my older brother and I. And my dad would go to the bathroom, shave. We would then eat about probably 20 minutes after he got home. And on the days that we would get our report card, which was, I don't know, probably what, 4 or 6 times a year, I forget what it was, uh, he would then, at some point, ceremoniously open the report cards. And the deal was you got 50 cents a B and $1 an A, which, I'm talking about a long time ago. That was quite a bit of pocket change, right?
That would have been big, big bucks for me.
Yeah. And most of the time I got A's. And not without a lot of work. And, but at one point, all of a sudden, out of the blue, he said, I'm not going to pay you for the B's anymore. I think you could get all A's. And I remember feeling humiliated and ashamed that I didn't get all A's already. That was my first reaction. And my second reaction was, yeah, I bet I can. And
You
so
bet you, you bet
that
you
kind of,
can't. You
I
can't.
can't. No, I bet I can. I bet I
Oh,
can.
you bet you can. Okay.
And so then, and every once in a while I'd get a B and I wouldn't get the 50 cents. I'd get nothing. It was all or nothing. And it didn't register that that was actually kind of how I thought things worked in my family, or feared. I didn't think that, but I feared that that was actually really the rule. Of course, here the rule was being stated quite explicitly, and you didn't get the 50 cents. And it didn't matter that much because it was, once in a while it would be a B, but the message was clear. And shaming like that is people think that's going to make you work harder or do better or conform the way, like, you shouldn't want to be a girl, you're a boy, you should want to, and you should want to be matched, so we're going to shame the crap out of you until you conform. And actually it's for your own good, right?
What?
And it was for my own good. Why would you not want to get all A's? Now, in my opinion, most really good educators would say, that's not the way you teach somebody. That's not the way you inspire somebody to be a student. That's not the way people learn. Well, my father did a GED. My mother never went to high school. I'm not trying to blame. I'm just saying I grew up thinking that was okay. And so all through my life, I went to law school. After I spent a year on a fellowship in seminary, I decided I wasn't sure. So I'm going to go to law school. And halfway through the first year, I decided I don't want to be here. I don't know why, but I actually don't think I want to be. I came home. My father got very angry. And then he started shaming me. It was a variation on the A and B thing. He said, I don't know what's wrong with you. You always said you were going to be a lawyer. This is, you're just not well. You're upset when you take some time off, and when you feel better, you'll go back. And every time he would see me, he would say, "When are you going back? When are you going back? And when you go?" So finally, I stopped seeing him for a year. I had no contact with him. So that's what catapulted me into, because I went into therapy trying to understand shame. Now, I was
Ah,
my
that's a very revealing thing. I guess I've heard that story before,
was
but
my yeah yeah
it's
that
registering
what
on me very powerfully today.
I had no ability to connect the dots. I mean, I don't think I'm putting things together that don't belong together. I'm certainly remembering these things and chronologically. Uh, but it took a long time for me to try to figure out again. Not and first of all, to not blame him. What I learned about him was he must have grown up around a lot of shame,
Oh
because
yeah. Oh yeah.
therapists would say to me, well, your parents must have grown up a lot. Well, later I'd find out my mother had been sexually abused by her father. You think she grew up around a lot of shame? So,
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
yeah. So that's right. I remember telling my older brother that, and he said, "Why do you say such a terrible thing?" And then later he was having lunch with a cousin who said to him, "No, no, your mother told me that happened." Oh, so I don't know. I didn't know why Jim had said such a crazy thing about her. And I said to him, "Why do you think
Oh,
I'm just?" I said, "She acts," because later I would learn people who are abused carries shame. You
Oh
see,
yeah.
shame cover, and that's the in some ways why you have to try to figure it out. You can say, well, why do I even need to know? Why should we be talking about? What difference does it mean? Leave it alone. The reason is it's often covering up other things.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay,
Often
so here
come, and
I want to break in with a thing before we lose the tail of this snake.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that is how shame functions in the process of socialization. Now, I don't know a lot about about what I'm going to say, but I think I know enough to make the statement carefully that there are cultures in this world where shaming is a time honored and well respected phenomenon as a way of cultivating children into a social profile that is unique to that particular culture. And I'm not going to specify anything, but you can fill in it up. And I don't think that's actually unusual. I think that probably is something that except for the last couple of 100 years in the West, has been generally the case, pretty much throughout the world. Now, my question, and to some extent my problem, is this: it's easy to give shame in general a real black eye and say that no shaming is ever good. That may be right, but it's not my point of view. My point of view is there are times when it is, as speaking as a parent, a former a former parent, a parent, I think that there are times, there are precious few times, but not to shame someone gratuitously or for something they didn't do that was in the way of achievement or something like that, but for a moral um, transgression that is absolutely antisocial. Now, I never had that with either of my kids. I don't think my parents had it with any of the three of us, my two brothers or me. However, I'm thinking of people, and I have known some in the course of my own ministry, a few, not many, thank God, who were real sociopathological people, um, and who had no sense of shame, no sense of thing. And I'm thinking right now of a story that I just heard from a good friend about about someone he's close to who gets absolutely no correction as a child whatsoever because her parents have apparently the idea that it is actually counterproductive ever to tell her she's wrong. Now, I'm not talking about murder and those kinds of things, but I am talking about self-destructive and socially destructive things. How do we actually weigh in and teach people um, sometimes not just what not to do, but that what has been done is unacceptable? How do we do that without getting into gratuitous shaming, unnecessary shaming,
or destructive
or
destructive
destructive
shaming.
shaming? Exactly. Could you speak to
Yeah.
that?
So, well, I mean, you're saying some very important and complex things, like the kind of pathology you're alluding to. I have known people who are quite ill, and without getting real political, I mean, if you go on record saying I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, you may be devoid of a moral compass. If
Exactly.
First of all, that you think you could, and second of all, you think you should be allowed to get away with it. But we're living at a time when a lot of people seem either to have no moral compass and they'll just do stuff to uh, make money or get ahead, or uh, we call this transactional. I mean, that's such a bullshit word. If what it means is, well, you just had to do, we used to say, well, you have to do it to get along, just to get along, well, no, as John Kennedy said when he wrote Profiles of Courage, he said, it's a short book because I was writing about people who had courage. If you wanted me to write about people who didn't have courage, I could have written a multi-volume set. Yeah, okay. So what I would want to know is not so much is there a better way for me to shame somebody. I would want to know, how can I more effectively help them develop their moral compass, or what's getting in the way of their being in contact with what is their moral compass. They have one. They used to live by it, but something has gone awry, and now they're disconnected. They're making choices that are contrary to what they say they value, which is how I would define guilt. Guilt is a warning sign. I'm not talking about neurotic guilt where you just go around saying, "Oh, I just feel so guilty," and you're not even sure why, and there's no particular reason.
Exactly.
But when you feel guilty because you did something wrong, that means you have a moral compass that's helping you realign to your values. I don't think people benefit by being shamed about that. I think they benefit by being encouraged and say, isn't that remarkable that you're holding yourself accountable? Whereas today we talk about people saying, oh my God, are they going to get away with that? I mean, how is it possible that that person could be in this high elected office or running that company or doing that? Well, people make mistakes. And so that's not justifying their behavior. We say, okay, now that's why we have not only a legal system, but all kinds of other ways of holding people accountable. But that doesn't mean you have to shame people.
Okay, and
We
that and
used to
that's a
we used to
it's
put
a,
them right in the middle of the town in the common, and we'd
put them in stocks.
put them in the stocks, and also if they were going to be hanged or something like that, people would go there to watch.
Oh
If they were
yeah,
going to be, going to the watch people beheaded at the guillotine, that was a communal activity.
oh
Well,
yeah.
or should we watch people electrocuted or having a poison put in their veins so that they get the death penalty? I personally, because of my religious convictions, I don't believe in I don't believe even somebody who's killed somebody we should kill. But I can understand why other people say no, they deserve to die. But then they deserve to die. And you know what? I want to watch them die. Well, I'm not sure that anybody really benefits by that. But you could make the argument that somebody who's had something so precious taken away from them, like they kidnapped and murdered your child or something, should they get to watch that person die in the electric chair? Or well, I don't know. Personally, I just
Well,
don't know. How is that going to help me? And it's not going to help the person who committed the crime. You say, well, I don't care about them. They should simply be put to death.
well, it's
So
called
this notion of
revenge. It's called,
shame,
we
yeah,
live we
yeah.
live in a culture which is drunk on revenge right now.
And
You
shame
know,
it may be less than capital punishment, but it may be a variant on that revenge thing.
oh, I think it is. I think it's sometimes a non. I started to say non-violent, but I think it's a form of violence actually.
It
But
is. It sure is emotionally violent.
I think that I think you're making a good point about the way we positively help people construct a moral compass. Now, I want to segue a little bit. It sounds like I'm going off topic, but I want to talk about something that I think is a live issue. One of the things that I'm doing, not in this context of Frank Words, but as you know, in the blog that I'll say a little bit more when we when I close this out in a little while. But I've been really preoccupied in the last several weeks about the what I call the long view. Instead of being reactive to everything that's going on right now, it's a lot. Um, and even if you think that you approve of most of it or some of it or all of it or whatever, it's still a lot. It's like a fire hose that every day that something is happening. People are being murdered in the oceans and all this kind of stuff. So,
And that's part of the strategy is, flood the zone,
oh yeah, exactly.
overwhelm,
Okay,
overwhelm people.
so my question has been, what do we need to have what do we need to be doing now? What do I need to be doing that is actually in preparation for living a better way in a future that we don't have at present, but better well be able to construct if we're going to get out of some of the mess that we're in. And again, I think I don't know how that's going to work, but I do know this. I know a couple of things. Number one, it is not going to come down entirely from on high. It's got to start at the ground level. It's got to be a combination, a cooperation between the groundwork and the above work. You know, it's got to be the grassroots and the treetops. You know, in conjunction, working with each other, so that systemic change can actually take root. All right, what this is all about and how it relates to shame is I'm thinking of an incident that just recently happened to me. In fact, it's a two-part incident, and the two people that are involved in it perhaps know each other, but they were not involved together. One came up to me in a context that was a usual context and said, "Do you know so and so, who is a political adversary to you and to me and da 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 da?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do." Um, and the point that that person was making is essentially, I want nothing more to do with that person. I want nothing more to do. I want no relationship, and I don't want anybody that I know to have a relationship and so forth. Well, you know, now this is not at least by my experience, a mean person talking, but it certainly is a person who was dealing in the coinage of what I would call shame. And I basically said, well, you know, I have in fact had some conversations with that person, and this is, you know, where it led, and it was not, you know, kind of an acrimonious sort of thing. Okay. Later on, the person that he was talking about um, checked in to see whether a discussion that I had a part in leading was going to, you know, be something that she would feel comfortable in. And basically, I said, you know what, I want you to come. And I want you to be aware that the point of this thing is not to take sides or to draw, but I want you to be in a place where you feel safe. And if you got some questions, if you've got a point of view like that, um, you know, you're on the same footing as everybody else. Now, this sounds like a kind of a self promotion on my part of being the good guy and it's a good cop. And if that's true, then I'll just have to live with whatever the implications of that are. But what I'm thinking about is we talk a lot about building alliances, and we talk a lot about uh, getting over the divisiveness by making bridges to the other side and so on and so forth. I don't think that's exactly bullshit. But I think that one of the things we've got to get used to is building bridges is not an alternative to dealing with the coinage that we have allowed to build the bridges in the first place, to divide us in the first place. Um, and part of that is shame, and a part of it is guilt. I look at Germany, for example, after World War II. I realize that it was not a perfect thing. But you mentioned about the welcoming of immigrants and so on and so forth. Germany in post-war Europe has had and still has, to a great extent, a very different role from what pre-war Germany had. I think anybody would say that, including the Germans. Now, I understand that there's a good segment of the population that wants to return to a lot of that pre-war stuff, but on the whole, the denazification of Germany was a process that worked that probably not as well, or even to be compared. I guess it can be compared to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, which led to a social reconstruction of a lot of the country. It wasn't perfect. And we're seeing today, you know, 20, 30, almost 40 years later, how some of it just didn't work. Um, but these processes of building new societies that operate differently, I think, have to do with how we handle shame and how we handle guilt and how we don't ostracize people or exile people because of who they've been and what they've been. On the other hand, I think it was appropriate that Eichmann be tried, you know. So I'm talking about a lot of things that are global, but they come down to, in my mind, a personal level. You know,
Well,
how we deal with people that you know, not only are in our charge, but whom we're related to, that we frankly find it easier to shame and just wash our hands of.
well, we're going through in this country, in my opinion, a very dangerous period. And part of that is manifested in this business of some people thinking they have the right to determine who gets to read what books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would be one example. Some people deciding how we should read and interpret history. These are two fundamentally central aspects of how a country gets either honestly and truthfully to face its history or not. And Germany's a great example that there were some elements post-war, post-Second World War, very different from what happened after the First World War and the humiliation they went through. However, if I introduce you to some members of the family of people who were part of the Stasi during post-World War II, Cold War Germany, and they tell you what it was like to have members of their family spying on other members of their family, I don't know that you would think Germany went through a linear or entirely good reconstruction. I
Exactly.
mean, America, I think it's fair, although a lot of people today would like to uh, press charges against me for saying failed reconstruction. We started after the Civil War on a certain path that the country couldn't tolerate, in my opinion. And so we got our Jim Crow period very, very soon after we supposedly started Reconstruction. We've never gone through the Reconstruction. And now we have a deconstruction, even about some of the things we said we wanted to deal with to make us a more perfect union and to make equal rights, equal justice. These are not supposedly just pie in the sky concepts that we were trying to study in school. These were supposed to be the core values of what we thought it meant to be a poor, I thought anyway, this is what I was taught, what I believe, a more perfect union. So again, shame covers things up. And
Yep.
if you start shaming people and you start acting like we have something to hide, I just heard Trump has required all of the people working on the demolition that's the precursor to the building of this ballroom to sign non-disclosure agreements. Now you have to ask, why would you have demolition construction workers sign NDAs unless you just don't want them talking to people? What are they going to be talking about? I mean, I assume they don't have anything to talk about other than tearing down the east wing of the White House, right? Well, whether you agree with tearing it down, whether you agree with the ballroom or you don't, that's a whole complicated thing. It's more complicated than maybe it should be, but it's complicated. I don't agree with it. Okay, but why would you want to keep people from telling what is the truth they might tell? Well, yeah, I ran that excavator that actually ripped apart. What are we talking about hiding from? What are we
Well, and you're
ashamed
talking
of?
about things that don't make sense. I mean,
And this is the story of history. We can look at it right now. Of course, I don't know what it'll look like 50 years from now, but some of the history you're alluding to is much older than, oh, they just destroyed this week the East Wing of the White House. So
oh
we
yeah.
don't have any perspective on that, right? I don't know how much perspective we have really on the Second World War. Sometimes I listen to people talk about it and I think, I don't know what they're talking about. Or the not now. Oh, well, Hitler didn't, he did some good things, I hear people say. And I said, well, have you ever been to the death camps? Have you ever been? What are you alluding to? It's like we say about Daley. At least things ran on time in Chicago when he was mayor. And I think the real issue is going to be you want to be self-aware for the same reasons we want to be aware as a community, a culture, a nation, or an international community. Because if you're better informed, you can make better choices. That was the whole point of therapy. to bring to consciousness the things that are unconscious so you could make better choices.
Well,
And
exactly.
as a country, if right now we're blowing ships up in, say, the Caribbean or even in parts of Asia, and you go like, oh, okay. And people say, oh, no, I don't. We have President of the United States says, I have the right to do this. I can order this done because I'm the commander in chief. I don't have to go through any judicial process whatsoever. I don't have to go to Congress, and I'm not subservient to international law. Well, what's the remedy? The remedy, it seems to me, is for a lot of people to stand up and say, why do we even have something called international law? What is the point of it? What was life like before we had international law? And if you think this is going to make something, whether it's America or something else, great again, to go back to a time when we were not bound by international law, then you don't know a damn thing about history, in my opinion. So
Okay,
it's the same
so
thing personally. You want to be self-aware because life was not better when we used to just cover this stuff up. My mother never told anybody about her abuse. Was her life better because she kept that secret?
well, we're talking
No, she
about
told my cousin, but I'm sure when she told my mother lost her first husband before she married my father and had started having kids in World War II. I found out when I was 17 that she had been married before and had lost her husband because of the war. And when she
oh,
told me,
I'll bet
she
everybody can tell some story about that kind
she
of thing.
meant she looked, Frank, like she was telling me that she had murdered somebody. The guilt on her face. And I said, Mom, what? Well, what happens? Well, he was involved with D-Day and this and that. And I could feel the guilt oozing from her body. And I kept thinking, who did something wrong? I mean, it's horrible. And I said, well, I didn't know what his name was. What was his name? Oh, his name was Morris. I said, and he got killed in the Second World War. I mean, he hadn't done anything. I mean, he got killed, right? But the way
Okay,
she
but
told the story was like she
she
did something wrong.
okay, so she really had a real issue with shame, and it's not unusual. I want to
And
say
she
a
raised
couple.
a kid who would have a real issue with shame.
That's the way it happens. It happens.
Right, there you go. And again,
I
I
don't
don't, I
have
don't,
quite
I hope
such
this doesn't sound like I'm blaming her. What I'm saying is, it doesn't get better if you keep the secrets.
no, it doesn't. The same story that you have just told, I can't tell as dramatic a story as that. But when I was a young man in my 20s, I sat around with a bunch of relatives, and my mother, who didn't strike me as a person um, who was loaded up with secrecy or whatever else like that. I'm not naive enough to think that she didn't have any shame. I'm sure she did. You know, she grew up in a culture of shame the way your mother did, and all the rest of that generation, as well as ourselves. In a perhaps slightly different way, but at least we have been acquainted with therapy and some alternatives for dealing with the stuff that they didn't necessarily have or avail themselves of. However, um, my mother told a story about how her mother, who died when she was 11, had been married before my grandfather. And I said, I've never heard that story. Well, it turns out I won't go into detail because it's not worth it. But suffice it to say, there was a lot of that story that didn't come out in that hearing and did come out in another conversation I had with one of my mother's siblings, one of her sisters, and it had to do with perhaps some foul play. You know, I don't know, but what we are saying, has another side. The expression of putting lipstick on a pig is not far off the mark of how we treat, the things of which we are ashamed. We dress them up and talk about them, either not by silence, of course, that's not talking about them, but by emphasizing the sanctity of the people who have done this, or at least excusing them because they have been so battered and so banged and so on and so forth. Well, that's true, and I'm not saying that I don't do that, but that's not dealing with shame. That's
Well,
prettifying shame.
I mean, think of some of the common adages like, What you don't know won't hurt you. And you
Boy, is that
watch
ever,
how these
yeah,
people were deeply wounded and carried this their whole life, and the impact it had on their life. Or I'll ask people, do you know the expression ignorance is bliss? Do you know that that's not actually the slogan or saying? It's by Eaton. Do you know what the whole saying is? Ignorance is bliss when 'tis folly to be wise. When in your life have you thought that it was folly to be wise? Why have you spent so much time and energy on getting an education and continuing your education throughout your life?
yeah,
Because you thought it was
yeah.
folly to be wise? But
Good
ignorance is
question.
bliss. No, no, the saying is ignorance is bliss only when it's folly to be wise.
Wow.
But
Who was
people go around and
the author
say,
of
you know
that? Who
what?
was the
That's right.
author of that?
Eton, Eton, of Eton School. So
Oh, okay.
what people they'll just come right out and say when they're wanting to cover something up. Why do we do? Because it's painful. Of course, it's pain. The stuff I'm talking about, I don't necessarily enjoy remembering it. I remember sitting on the front porch in our house when I was 17 years old. I was putting Hartford Current papers together because I was a newspaper boy. My mother came out with my brother and she said, I have something I have to tell you. I don't know. I didn't know what she was going to tell me. And and then I'm putting the papers together because it was Sunday paper. It was Saturday afternoon. And you had to put these Sunday papers together. And they were really heavy and you had to lug them around and deliver them on Sunday morning. And the way she sat there and she got so nervous and felt so, you just feel the guilt. And I felt so badly for her. But I realized her whole life she carried things like this around and her own abuse
Now,
and her,
that was the time she shared about her husband, her first husband.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I, you know,
It's an
why do we want we don't want to talk about this stuff just because it's like let's why don't we go out on a picnic and talk about all things we're ashamed of or
I don't know. I don't
we
know.
feel shame we don't nobody wants to do that, but by
Okay.
bringing some
So,
of this stuff to the light of day we can embrace what it is that we really value and believe in. Like, am I a person worthy of being accepted for who I am? That you said this at the very beginning. You said, I'm really glad that things didn't turn out the way I thought I wanted them to be when I was in first grade. Because I like who I am. I like the way I am. I don't, with all due respect to people who do transition, you're saying, I actually didn't want to be a woman. So,
well, the thing of it is that there's a part of me still that that feels what I felt as a child, and it's taken me a long
sure,
time. And it hadn't been
good.
only therapy, but a number of other things, kind of ancillary to that, that have helped me um, affirm myself and to
And accept yourself. Absolutely.
have I ever showed you this? And those who are listening and not seeing this are not seeing that
Oh,
this is a picture of me when I was a child.
no,
I
I've never
the
seen that.
blue ribbon down at the bottom of this photo is the first prize that I won dressed like this in drag in 1949 when I was 4 years old in Conway, South Carolina.
Wow.
Apparently, transphobia was not a big thing in 1949 in rural South Carolina. Um,
Well,
you
because
know,
people weren't transitioning then,
well, they
or
weren't.
if they
And
did, they do it
well,
very quietly.
but there were
So
little
now
boys
we
who
think we should
probably
be
got beaten up because they dressed
you
up like little girls. Um,
because we thought we could control it and put it back where it belonged by shaming it.
well, exactly. So, and I can't let this session go without saying that for a decade, as you know, and as some of our listeners and viewers know, I spent my time and energy and whatever creative juices I had investing in making safe spaces for men of any kind to integrate their sexual and spiritual lives in whatever way that those things take shape for them.
This is
And
Jonathan.
what the main thing, Jonathan Circle, the main thing that Jonathan Circle taught me in that period of time, and still teaches other people because it's still a going operation, is that the amount of shame that men have about a lot of things, it's not only about sexuality, by far. I mean, that's one of the main things. But body shame and the way men are socialized, and I don't know that this is entirely different from the way women are socialized. I've just never been a woman who was socialized. I've got two daughters, and I would like to think it didn't happen to them as much as it happened to some men that I know, including myself. And that is, if you do anything that is girlish, if you do anything that is perceived to be unmanly, if you do anything that is perceived to be soft when the occasion requires something to be tough, all of these things are little chinks in the armor that you wear forever, and the whole of the armor is called shame. It is like a coat of mail with chinks in it that people wear all the time. They're essentially four things I think that men are socialized to do: uh, produce, perform, provide, and and there's another one. Anyway, I have my four, and I can always think of three. Um, and the reason is the reason that we have so much shame is that if we fail in any one of those capacities when we're called upon to do so, protect is the fourth one. The amount of shame that can ensue is absolutely astonishing,
Yeah.
and it
Well,
may
that little
not
book
feel
by
that.
John
Hmm?
Powell that says, Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am?
Yeah, exactly.
Which I read many years ago. And the basic premise is, if I told you who I really am, you would abandon me.
Yeah,
So, the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, which forgive to forgive, really, there's something syllogistic about it. If I practice forgiving you, I may get to a place where I know that I've been forgiven. I think shame is like that too. If I learn how to deal with my own shame and move towards self acceptance, then I don't have to shame others.
there you go.
And how would I learn that? Well, practice by not shaming others. Start that way. If you don't shame others, you may learn how not to shame yourself. If you can. So, what I heard when we started, what I heard in your comment was not that you had to give up those feelings that you had in the first grade. It was that you could move towards self acceptance
Exactly.
and
It took
say,
me
I
decades to
like,
do, but
I actually
that's
like
it.
who I am. I like who I am. I like who I
Yep.
am. I,
Yep.
I didn't have to throw those feelings away. I didn't have to put myself down. I didn't have to live a life of shame. Maybe I did at times more than I should have, but I didn't know. But I had to learn, and I couldn't learn from people who were shame based because they didn't know any better. But I could learn. I could learn, and so I could learn from mentors. I could learn from therapists. I could learn from friends if they were dealing with their own sense of shame and beginning to heal and move towards self acceptance.
That's a good.
Otherwise, we cover this stuff up, and the stuff we're covering up is often things like fear of abandonment, all kinds of fears and self-loathing and stuff that is just totally unproductive and unconstructive. So good guilt, good guilt versus neurotic guilt helps us move into that moral compass and say, wait a minute, I'm violating my own values. There's a warning alarm going off. I've done something that violates what I believe in. So I need to set that right. And so that's why we have things, as you know, at least as well as I, where we offer people confession and all. How do you move from having done something wrong to being reconciled? We call it the right
Exactly.
of reconcile. We don't call it the right of shame. We call it the right of what's the
Right.
point is reconciliation. Why was Jesus in the forgiving business if you come at this from a Christian perspective? But if you come at it from just a purely human perspective, I don't want more carnage. I don't want more people on the junk heap, a pile of people whose lives were wasted, where they couldn't be self accepting and become their truest selves, their best selves, their most
Yeah.
productive selves. And what's in it for me? Well, even if I just approach this from a citizen perspective, like Going back to the basics, well, okay, as a citizen, what would I want immigration policy to be? I don't want all these jingoistic, nonsensical assertions that are idiotic. They just throw everybody into this heap of this and name them that and call them the other and shame this one and shame that one. And then after a while, you get people going into positions of leadership, and I guess they lose complete touch with their own moral compass because they'll do whatever it takes to do what? To get reelected, to keep their job. They're not even doing their job. Why would they want to keep it? Right now, we don't have
Well,
a Congress that's going into work. So you say, well, I have to do this to get reelected. Why would you want to get reelected so you can't even show up for work? I've never had a job like that. I don't want a job like
well,
that.
these are questions that we probably won't get to today. I want to thank you very much for raising a lot of them. You've made uh, a great many things that, to my mind, make a good deal of sense out of this cumbersome problem that we all share. It's kind of like a blanket that we can't successfully throw off, and probably never will learn entirely to throw off this thing called shame. We haven't talked very much about guilt, but the things that you've said that I think are leaping out at me at this is that guilt is a partner to shame. It's not necessarily the same thing. There
Good
are
guilt.
things
Yeah.
of which we've good guilt is stuff that 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 we deal with because we do have a moral compass. So the challenge, I'd rather say, is to review what we're doing to keep the moral compass. And if it's gone or if it's in ill repair, what do we do to put it back together again? I think that is how
That makes sense to me.
reconciliation, shakes out. So I want to thank all of you for listening today. And if you're looking at the video version of this on YouTube, you'll see in the frames that follow my contact information, as well as some of the related projects that I'm working on. I mentioned one of them called Angels and Principalities, a blog exploring the intersection of faith and politics. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or another podcast platform, you can possibly click for a manuscript, a transcript for the conversation that Jim and I have had today. And I invite you listeners, to enter into these conversations on Frank Words. Send your comments, your suggestions, your questions, and your reviews to Frank G. Dunn at gmail.com. That's Frank G. Dunn, FrankGDUNN, at gmail.com. And we'll be back soon with another edition of Frank Words. Next time, I think it's going to be on joy and happiness. Be sure to join us on that podcast and make sure that you join the podcast so that you won't miss that or some other edition of it. And take good care, remembering always to speak your very own frank words.